I wish I could have been here with you all day, luckily, and we can do a collective groan on this. I was in TCAP testing until about an hour ago. Yeah. So lucky I even got out of the cage today, but my kids are still up there. Usually I haul some with me, and I have to say that for the first time in a long time, I'm not in a suit up here. I'm in my Angry Bird shirt because we're going to talk a little bit about this. This is actually a presentation that my students and myself have presented because it came up over a brainstorm that we actually had. And how many of you guys brought your iPad today? Do you guys have your iPad? Turn it upside down right now so you're not playing Angry Birds while I talk. Just, as a side note. But, interestingly enough, we have been talking at our school for a while about student-brought technology. I don't know if you're starting to have these conversations at school, but we're having a real budget crunch like everybody else. I was kind of thrown into the fire last year as Colorado Teacher of the Year in those budget conversations, and they continue to go forward. And I know all of you are feeling that in your districts, and we are as well. I'm from Adams 12, and one of the conversation that comes is, where do you prioritize? What do you do? What do you use? How do you use it? And we're really starting to have conversations around student purchase technology coming into the classroom, which is totally freaking out the district because they're all concerned about liability, right? All that legal piece of, if you're going to break something, if a kid drops it, what happens with this student doing this and surfing? And I'm like, surfing. Well, that's a conversation. Because for me, it really isn't about that. Because if kids are surfing in the classroom, then it means you're not engaging, you're not differentiating, you're not really doing what you should be to have an engaging classroom. And we all know, and we as adults, we can kind of monitor our time, or at least we hope, until we hit Facebook and now Pinterest and Angry Birds and, the 195 applications on Apatic and a few others. I would write that one down if you have not had that URL given to you today. It's called Apatic. It's a wonderful resource and site that will actually go along with a little bit of what I'm talking about today. And that site really takes applications used for mobile technology and puts them into blooms for you. And so it lays it out, gives you some differentiation, and really can help support what you're doing in the classroom. So around all these conversations about technology, engaging kids, what I continue to hear, and I get some pushback once in a while with, is, wait a minute though, my kids are engaged, but they're engaged in their own thing. They're not listening to me. They're losing the content because they're doing other things. Well, that's because you've got to think about it out of the box a little bit. And that's what these great marketers did. How many of you at Christmas saw anything and everything Angry Birds? Yeah? Walmart, Target, online, you name it. Now, I wasn't brave enough today, but when I went to Utah, I actually wore my Angry Birds costume. 3 of my boys decided that they wanted to be a family of Angry Birds for Halloween. So we all bought them. And I got the yellow one. I got relegated to yellow. I don't know why. Somebody wanted to be the pig. So that's what ended up happening there. And so I didn't wear that today because I can't find them, for one reason. And 2, I thought professionally, maybe not. You're always a little concerned about where this video is going to end up. And I don't know that I wanted to be walking around in a yellow Angry Bird if somebody wanted to share it on Facebook. So, but those costumes and the pillows and everything else that the grandparents so generously gave gift cards for at Christmas seem to roam around my house. But interestingly enough, my kids made a connection with this. And when I say my kids, I generalize as my students, but also my kids in the classroom. And my kids in the classroom really talk about learning differently. Because I teach at a school that has regular kids, that has low-end kids, that has GT kids. Sound familiar? Should. We're all in that same boat. Well, Angry Birds kind of fits that. And I wanted to just ask about this. What if we recognized that our teaching style really was like an Angry Birds maze? Because when we were talking about a matrix that I had handed out to my kids, I gave them a long one that said, here are 20 different social networking tools that you can use to accomplish this application. And I wasn't looking at it as a bell and whistle in the classroom. I was looking at it as a differentiation technique. I wanted to give them ways that they could apply what they were doing in the classroom. Now, any single one of my kids can tell you what loc.gov means. They know it. They know it as lock.gov, so they can remember it. but they know primary sources. But we don't do just knowledge and comprehension. We ask for those higher level thinking skills, which is what we've been talking about. It's what our students right here talked about with History Day. Fantastic. But what if we looked at our standards like a puzzle, like a game that we were out to win? As teachers, and I can tell you after proctoring the rows of TCAP today, our nice transitional Colorado assessment program, that there is a piece of win in this. Now that we have a waiver here in Colorado, which is, for good or bad, there are a lot of conversations around that, we maybe are still thoughtful about what NCLB asked us to do, but more importantly, we need to think about our standards and outcomes. And one of the great things that I think has happened with standards and outcomes in our state is that nice little right side of our new standards that gives those inquiry questions and the thinking like a historian and those application questions, because it asks us just this: how do we work through a maze? And so my kids said, well, you know, we have to memorize facts, we need to know content, we've got to be able to tell what a metaphor is and all of this. And they said, well, why couldn't we show it in a lot of different ways? Well, that's exactly what happens here. How many of you guys have played Angry Birds? Yeah? So you know that in Angry Birds, you can come through and there's lots of different pathways to clear this screen to get on the next one. And now we have beach Angry Birds and, you know, everything Angry Birds. I mean, there's always something. There was a Christmas one too. But you don't necessarily have to clear all 3 stars in order to go on to the next level. So what if we thought about our standard as being that game board, and each one of those boxes being one of our outcomes? And instead of trying to methodically go step by step all the time, to allow our students to use primary sources and technology and higher level thinking skills and application in the classroom to pick and choose and move through this maze to meet their engagement needs, to meet their skill base, and to get them through that playboard, which then meets that standard. It's a little bit different way of thinking. In fact, one of them, we were talking about this, you know, lovely when you always have your classroom and you're right in the middle of something and who walks in but your administrator with 5 guests. And this happened because we were looking at Angry Birds off of my little iPad and it's up on the screen and in walks the superintendent. That went over ever so well. Now I'm lucky because our superintendent in Adams 12 is a pretty good thinker, and Chris Godowski's really great, and he looks at it and he says, well, you want to explain that one? And I said, well, I'm not going to explain it. Let's have the kids explain it. And so one of my students stood up and said, you know, Mr. Godowski, we have to learn all this stuff, but we'd rather learn it that way. Well, we know that. We know that kids are engaged in games. We know that this keeps their attention. But then he said, well, give me the value of that, because for me, that's a game. They said, oh, it's not about the game. It's about the fact that you give us multiple tries to learn something before you tell us we don't know it. Wow. Okay, out of the mouth of a 7-year-old. Isn't that nice? To the superintendent. Now, we know that kids don't have fear, right? They don't have those boundaries that we have. And so when we start talking about differentiation, what if we took each one of those and said, okay, each one of those is one of our standards outcomes. Or maybe each one of those is an integrated standard from a content area that allows us that, number 1, maybe science, and number 2, maybe that's math, and number 3, maybe that's music. And I could go on from there. And maybe all of those tie to a larger theme that's that game board, which is change over time in social studies. Could we look at it that way? And that's what the kids were asking us to think. Give us multiple chances, give us multiple ways to learn. And that's what we're about, and that's what primary sources is about, and that's also what technology is about. You know, I was bent, I was going to get that 25 billionth app. I stayed up till 3 in the morning, and I'm sure that I was 25 billion and one. Anybody know that challenge I'm talking about? $10,000 for tech in the classroom. I was all about it. Well, let me tell you another way you can get it. If you haven't heard about it today, TPS has an amazing primary source challenge going on, and it is tied to our Facebook page. It is wonderful. I love it, but my kids love it. And they're the ones that are looking every Tuesday on the Facebook page to find out what the next clue is. Write it down now. Connect as a friend. and see what's going on. And maybe you'll learn about why there was a one-legged rooster in Theodore Roosevelt's White House. Yes, that was the winning one, which one of my students said. We got in a huge argument over it in class. We submitted it, and now they won. The $15 iTunes card came into the classroom. Now that is still a general conversation about what we're going to do educationally with it. But hop in, because it's a chance to win an iPad. It's a chance to have some fun, and it's a chance to engage kids in leveled learning, basic understandings to higher level thinking to application. Amazing. TPS knows that. They're skilled at it, but so are we. And it's time that we start taking our profession back and we start thinking about, you know what, we know what's best. We do know what's best. It's time that business people, that outside people stop telling us what to do in our profession, and instead we redesign our classrooms, and that's why you're here. That's why you've taken 8 hours out of your day to learn about primary sources. Look at this. This came up, and I thought this was really interesting. One of the kids found this, and they said, is that a primary source? And I looked at it, and I thought, oh, really? Ugh. So then we had a conversation about primary sources again, and came to the general conclusion that, yeah, it's a primary source. And look at how they did the media. Doesn't that look nice and antique? This is hanging on my board now. It kind of reminds us of a few things. But what if we thought about what Angry Birds did and said that we're going to attack every standard by saying, yes, I'm going to include something about literacy in what I do? Because we all know, testing or not, that differentiation piece has to be there for kids. We will never get kids out of the cycle of poverty without it. Then, engaging kids in the use of 21st century learning each and every day. And that doesn't mean the use of technology. That does mean higher level thinking, as you've been talking about today. And can we actually involve kids in higher level thinking? It doesn't happen every day. If you think you can walk into a classroom and do that higher level thinking piece out of the chute with every class period, then we need to be reflective educators, because we know that there are good days and bad days in that. But differentiation asks us to design our questions differently, to ask for open-ended questions, to ask for questions that do not allow a yes-no answer. Differentiation is as simple as that. It's as simple as thinking about what the designers of Angry Birds did. They had one game concept: shoot a bird, knock down something. Get a great maze, do this. But what happened is they built it on levels so that you had to pass those. That's what we're about as teachers, that leveled learning. And if we really played that game effectively, using Common Core standards, using some of these things, a couple of these icons you'll recognize. SB 191 is coming in. Don't kid yourself. You know, that was passed. A lot of people feel it's good, it's bad, it's a new way to evaluate. But let me tell you that it's going to prove that we have the power as teachers to change our students, and we can be evaluated effectively doing that. The bottom triangle right here is a little hard to see, but that's a Google triangle that gives technology tools at all the levels of blooms. We know our Common Core standards are being developed. Let's help as educators in this room to make those powerful and to get continued standards in all content areas, not just math, not just literacy, not just science. Let's remember the humanities. And can we make our kids into experts? Put the learning in their hands. Can we give them choices in the classroom to differentiate? Because if we're not giving them choices, they're not learning. I want to share these pictures. These actually came up. These are from yesterday and day before yesterday. And here's the power of primary sources behind you. Behind me, really. Down here on the right-hand side is Senator Udall. These students are with a program called the Colorado Preserve America Youth Summit. Out of those 20 kids, 16 of them are actively using Teaching with Primary Sources in their website to do research. And every single one of them is a mentor to another student. 10 of those kids are mentors to classrooms in their schools. And these schools range from middle schools to high schools all over the metro area in southeast Colorado and southwest Colorado. Here they're meeting with Senator Salazar, Ken Salazar, to present him with an award. And up here they're lobbying on Capitol Hill to have continued funding for primary sources and to encourage our senators to let them learn the way they need to through active, engaging learning. Finally, up here they're on site. This is down in Dinosaur National Monument, standing in front of petroglyphs. What you don't see in their hands is in their backpacks is a stack of 25 primary sources where they took their research on site and were able to use it. Those kids, that was 3 years ago, those kids talked about this endeavor to Ken Salazar, who has a replica of a primary source, a petroglyph right here, that's given to him. And they remembered everything they learned. Maybe it's time we step out of what we're used to doing and step up for our profession and our kids and start saying we do know what's best and we do know how to differentiate. I want to leave you with one quote. This one, I do not just view inquiry from my role as an educator and learner. For me, it's really a quest for life. To understand life, to create what I call living knowledge, knowledge which is valid for the people with whom I work, instruct, and collaborate. Most of all, it's for myself. We know that learning lasts if it's for our students. We know they're going to remember Angry Birds. We know they're going to remember the impact because of the passion each one of you has for them. And we know that they'll come back to you in 5 years, and even though they hated that project you gave them, and they will have puzzled over the activity you had in class, they'll come back and say, thank you for the skills you gave me. Thank you for making me a 21st century learner. And thank you for differentiating in my class around the standards, which could have kept me in a box, but instead gave me the sky. Thank you for being here today and investing in your kids and in yourself. I appreciate it, and thank you for believing in primary sources and what you do every day. Thank you for teaching.